The history of Africa is also shaped by its physical features. If we look first at a map of the major civilizations of the ancient world, we'll see that these are spread out along an east-west axis, running from the Indus River Valley of present-day Pakistan in the east, all the way through the Middle East and the so-called Mesopotamian and Egyptian civilizations to the Mediterranean and Greece in the west. This east-west trajectory or east-west gradient is suitable for the transmission of technology and innovation between societies that operate in similar ecological systems, so that innovations in one area are easily adopted by their neighbors. Notice how different the situation is for Africa, whose major axis runs not east-west, but north-south. For example, innovations in an early center of civilization, such as Egypt, could not easily pass over the Sahara Desert and then through the dense rainforest to reach a similar ecosystem at the southern end of the continent. Those civilizations that lie on a north-south trajectory have traditionally been challenged in sharing their innovations with neighbors to the north or south. This is true in Africa. It was also true of the Americas. The question then becomes, where does civilization form in sub-Saharan Africa? If it can't easily be transmitted north to south, and it doesn't easily form at the mouths of the river systems, as occurred in Mesopotamia, the Nile, the Indus, and other river systems of the ancient world, where would it develop and how? And the answer lies in the transmission of civilization across the Sahara Desert and the creation of major centers of African civilization, not on the coast, but in the hinterland. The domestication of the camel and the introduction of the camel into North Africa in the 4th century AD opened up a caravan trade from the Middle East across the Sahara to major points in West Africa. And one of these major points was the city of Timbuktu, now located in the country of Mali on the upper Niger River. Timbuktu, in the 14th century, was a major center of the production of gold, and therefore an enormous attraction for merchants from the Middle East. In the 1320s, Mansa Musa, ruler of Timbuktu, and pictured here in a 14th century atlas produced in what is now Spain, was the king of gold of the ancient world. Mansa Musa led a caravan of over 60,000 men from Timbuktu to the Middle East on his pilgrimage to Mecca in the 14th century, and brought with him so much gold that when distributed on the markets of Cairo, depressed the value of gold for over a decade. In exchange for gold and slaves from Timbuktu, the kings Mansa Musa and his successors imported salt, which is a vital commodity for any society that lives distant from the sea, because we think of salt as something that would parch your thirst and therefore not very attractive if you live on the desert. But in fact, salt is essential for the body to absorb water, and therefore a crucial life-saving commodity for people who live in the interior of continents. Also important in the imports to Timbuktu were horses from the Middle East. Horses were vital for the formation of a powerful military around the rulers of Timbuktu that enabled them to control the surrounding territory, extract the gold for trade, and engage with the Middle East. In fact, the distribution of horses is suggested by this slide. This slide shows the distribution of the tsetse fly and of cattle in Africa. And you will notice that the range of cattle is only as far as they run into the tsetse fly, because once the tsetse fly dominates, it carries with it the trypanosome that causes what's called trypanosomas, or sleeping sickness, that attacks both hoofed animals and human beings. So the horse could penetrate across the Sahara as far as the Sahel, or grazing lands of West Africa, but not into the wetter lands of the south, or the area dominated by the tsetse fly. Finally, we should note that not only was this trade route from the Middle East to Timbuktu an important highway for the exchange of goods, it was also the method by which Islam entered West Africa. And Timbuktu was not only a major center of commercial exchange, but also a major center of Islamic learning, and remains so even today. This axis from the Middle East across land to the interior capitals of West Africa was overcome by the introduction of coastal trade from Europe by water around West Africa and into what is now the West African coast. You recall, as illustrated in this slide, that in the 15th century, the Portuguese began to make their way down the coast of West Africa. Their goal in the first instance was to reach the gold fields that they knew to exist in Timbuktu and elsewhere in the interior of West Africa. They well knew about these gold fields, as is indicated in this illustration of this 14th century atlas that pictures Mansa Musa atop his throne holding a gold orb. And they very much needed that gold, because trade between Europe and the Middle East was dependent upon the Europeans producing species or precious metals, which were in very scarce supply in Europe. And as a consequence, access to gold was a crucial element in enabling the Europeans to import goods from the Middle East. So the Portuguese were down there in the first instance looking for gold. They rounded the bulge of West Africa at the end of the 14th century and made their way down the coast, landing in what is now called, characteristically, the Gold Coast, where they first made their landfall and began to trade with natives for gold from the interior. They soon discovered, however, that an even more valuable commodity than gold was slaves, because as we've seen, by the 16th century, the Portuguese are opening up sugar plantations in the New World and are importing slaves from Africa to provide the labor for those plantations. In exchange, they trade muskets or guns, which were used by the Africans to capture still more slaves for exports, and a booming slave trade developed along the coast. Gradually, over time, slavery was outlawed, and the dominant form of trade shifted to the production of raw materials. For example, very important in the late 19th and early 20th century was the production of palm oil, peanut oil, and other oil-bearing seeds, not for consumption, but at the first instance as lubricants in the growing machinery industries of an industrializing Western Europe. In addition to this trade, as in the case of the interior trade with the Middle East, in the coastal trade with the Europeans came European missionaries, bringing not Islam, but Christianity. So in sum, the history of West Africa is one in which, in the first instance, the major axis of trade, of commercial development, and of cultural influence was overland from the Middle East across the Sahara to interior capitals, such as Timbuktu, on the banks of the Niger River. This was displaced after the 15th century by the growth of commercial exchanges along the coast, dominated now not by the Arabs from the Middle East, but by Europeans, and bringing with them a new religion, Christianity, that came to dominate, along with European trade, the growing commercial development of the West African coast.